Okay. Hi, welcome to us, the Nonprofit Meetup. I'm Nancy Manning, your hostess and founder of this group and Power Your Mission. And we do have a couple of new people to this meetup today. And for those of you who are new, I would like to invite you to come every month. We meet online the third Thursday of every month at 12:15, so you can set your watch by us. That's how consistent we like to be. So let's do a couple of housekeeping issues. I go through this every month of how to get from one screen to the next. So let's see. Yay, I did it. All right. Let's take care of a couple of housekeeping issues. First is the fact that we do have Shannon Mantrum from Leap to Success as our lovely Zoom host. Once again, we always appreciate Shannon. And if you have any issues today with Zoom or anything, you can communicate with Shannon through the magic of that drop-down button in your chat box. Generally, we try to discourage people from using the chat box while someone's speaking, other than to try to talk to Shannon. But today we're going to do something a little different. Sean has several topics he's going to cover. So what we want to invite you to do is, if you have questions about the topics he's on, go ahead and type them into the chat box. Shannon and I will monitor the chat box, and then when we reach the end of that section, we'll let Sean know if he has any questions to answer. And then at the end of Sean's presentation, there'll be another chance to ask questions. So speaking of Sean, let us introduce him. As you know, those of you who are on the Facebook group, our entire month of January has been devoted to nonprofit operations. I love the quote that Sean has on his website that you see on your screen. Behind every successful nonprofit, you'll find a strong back office. I love it because it reflects how important nonprofit operations are. So let me introduce you to Sean. Sean has over 20 years of experience helping nonprofits, and you may know him. Some of you may know him from his prior role at Mission Capital as Chief Financial and Operations Officer. So, Sean, would you like to say hi to the nice people and tell us a bit more what you do? And I'm going to stop my screen share.
All right, well, hello, nice people. Those of you who aren't nice, I'm not greeting you. We're gonna have a different conversation later. But in all seriousness, it's a real pleasure to be here with everybody. Nancy, thank you for that warm welcome. Please do somebody scream at me if something starts to go wrong with my presentation. We're all kind of juggling multiple screens and things like that, but I think you should be looking at my my PowerPoint deck now. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Good. Well, everybody who's on the call, thank you for being here today. And I'm especially grateful to you because it is so important that you want to serve your nonprofits better and that you understand the importance of having a, or at least you're open to, right? You're curious about the importance of having a strong back office as a key component of the whole picture, right? And in my experience, it's almost like a three-legged stool, right? You have programs, you have fundraising, and you have your back office operations, admin, whatever you want to call it. And if one of the legs on your stool is wobbly, you can't really put a whole lot of weight on that stool, right? And so that's kind of what I got into consulting to do, is to do that pretty much as I can, because I know there's so many great nonprofits out there who got their programs kind of working well, figuring out the funding, but very often there's something else that's holding them back and it's making it difficult for them to grow. And so often there's something or multiple things in the back office that are not big challenges to fix very often, but they just need a little help in seeing and understanding how to make it work better. So that's what I'm passionate about, is that, and just making the nonprofit work better. And so I end up finding myself in a situation where I find myself giving a lot of strategic financial advice to nonprofits. And of course, as Nancy mentioned, I'm passionate about saving money and working smarter rather than harder. So today I get to share with you 7 of my favorite tips for a strong back office. And these are tips that are certainly, they're good at anytime, but they're especially urgent right now because we have a pandemic going on that's making it hard for a lot of nonprofits to really do their best. And we also have increasing awareness of the importance of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. So I'm going to speak a little bit about that too on one of my 7 tips. So here are the 7 things we're going to cover today. I do hope to be able to get through it all within 30-ish minutes or so in terms of just presentation time. And so I do hope we'll have some good time for Q&A at the end. But if there, I'll leave it in Shannon and Nancy's hands. If there's a question that, is timely right at the end of a topic, we'll handle it then also. And so the last thing I'll say before I dive into the topic that you're all here for is just a quick legal disclaimer. Please don't sue me. This is this is all, I believe it's all very good advice, but it's all also very general advice. And so, we would want to get you some professional consultation before, if you want a guarantee or a highlight to be sure that this was exactly fine-tuned in how to apply it to your organization. So we're going to be talking about some general high-level concepts today, but it's nothing, please don't sue me over it. So tip number 1, hidden savings. And there are thousands of ways that nonprofits can save money, and pretty much every nonprofit can. I'm going to share with you one example today. And that's the example of the lazy vendor. And last year I got to work with a great nonprofit in San Antonio, smart staff, really tech forward, and they're really serious about automation and about working smarter, not harder. So much so that I was kind of afraid as I got into the engagement, like, am I going to be able to help these folks out? Because they were really on it. But turns out they had a couple of blind spots, and I was able to help them see that. And one of them was with their technology vendor. This is somebody who's helping them out with their database and some other things. And this vendor, the nicest thing I can say about them is that they are a sloth. Very slow response, especially to small and mid-sized nonprofits. This vendor actually has a reputation for being kind of crummy to small and medium-sized nonprofits. And they are also extremely overpriced. And so what did we do? Well, we had a little conversation about responsive vendors, and I helped connect them to somebody who I know and trust, who's gonna, they're in the process now of talking to this person, but they're gonna be able to get much better service. They're gonna be able to save, for the same number of hours, they're gonna be able to save about $12,000 a year. And so better service, savings, and this particular vendor is one that's trusted by Mobile Loaves and Fishes, I Live Here, I Give Here, Impact Austin, Creative Action, and other great nonprofits. Tip number 2, having the right tool for the job is also really important. And I'm gonna backtrack a little bit and tell you about my childhood, because when I was a kid, Swiss Army knives, I'd go to the mall and see them there, and my eyes would get big, and like there was pretty much nothing more that I wanted when I was a kid than a Swiss Army knife. And at one point in my life, any of them would have been good, but the one I especially wanted was the one that was like this thick, it was like 3 inches thick and has like 100 blades, and you can do anything with it. And that's one of the cool things about Swiss Army knives is you can pretty much do anything with them, right? You can cut down a tree with a Swiss Army knife. You can even make furniture, but it would probably take a really long time. And so I'm sure everybody on this call, that if you want to make furniture, it's going to be a much happier experience and a much faster experience if you have the right tool, right? If you have a good woodworking kit, rather than, unless it's some kind of crazy dare or you're like on some kind of survival show, right? You don't want to do that with a Swiss Army knife. But here's the thing, is that so often in nonprofits, we find ourselves doing that Swiss Army knife thing. And one example is QuickBooks. And QuickBooks, it's a great bookkeeping tool. Like all of them, it's not perfect, but it's really good. And so for small nonprofits and small businesses, it's number 1. It has great market share. It's pretty user-friendly. You can get a great discount on it through TechSoup, so it's just about free. And it's easy to find bookkeepers who are familiar with it. So that makes it a really great option. But here's the thing, is that a little over a year ago, I was having lunch with somebody from a local nonprofit, good nonprofit with good visibility, and come to find out, and this just accidentally came out over the course of lunch, they'd been using QuickBooks as their CRM. And CRM is just some fancy initials for donor database, pretty much. And what that means is that if they wanted to analyze their giving, or even do a mailing for that matter, it would take hours and hours and hours just to do kind of basic fundraising stuff, to get the data out of QuickBooks and get it all formatted right and working right. And they were feeling the pain. They had a sense of what was going on, and so they came up with a workaround, which was, we'll hire another development staffer. And so they're paying $40,000-$50,000 a year to have this guy pulling stuff out of QuickBooks. And the thing is that they, these were, I don't want to, wag my finger at them or make fun of them or anything else like that. Like, these are smart people, they're dedicated to their mission, and they're doing good work as an organization. And so many
Hey, am I the only one that froze?
No,
Can you hear Sean?
no.
He froze.
I can't hear him either.
Okay, Sean,
He won't be able to hear you. Can you text it? He might need to. Well, you might need to text him.
I don't have his phone number.
Oh, darn it! I'll see if he can catch the.
In the chat, maybe? 2 seconds, everybody.
Oh man. Yeah, he dropped out, so he'll come back. He realized.
Oh, okay.
Woo!
It's an internet connection, probably, right?
Yeah, something happened there. Just we're all using Zoom these days. That's sometimes we just drive too much traffic. I love what he was talking about, though. Just God, I know what he was getting at. It's like, what a ridiculous expense for somebody who's just pulling stuff out of QuickBooks.
I missed a little bit about QuickBooks.
I'm going to pause the recording until he comes back in.
are still here. So I apologize. I even have a second computer set up, but when the internet connection goes down, 2 computers don't do anything for you. So did we were talking about?
You were talking about the $50,000 a year QuickBooks guy.
Yes. All right, let me pull that back up. And
Sorry.
there we go. Yeah, so can you all see my screen again?
Yeah, it's white. There's no words on it.
Yeah.
Good. There we go.
There we go.
Yes.
The specific moral of the story is that QuickBooks is a great bookkeeping tool. It's not a very good CRM. And what I've seen happen over and over again is that sometimes in the nonprofit world, we end up kind of save a couple of bucks, or we're scrappy or whatever. We don't have time to figure out what the right tool is. We end up jerry-rigging things, and that can sometimes end up being really, really expensive for us. And so this particular nonprofit, they are now able to do their fundraising a whole lot better because they got the data out of QuickBooks, they got it into a real donor database. And so they're able to do a mailing like that, which is the way it should be, and not it being like a whole day to just pull the data out of their database. So speaking of things like this and the $40,000, $50,000 workaround that they had, time is money. And I know you guys know this. We're going to talk about this just a little bit, and I'm not suggesting that you introduce a stopwatch into your nonprofit office, right? We're not doing stopwatches, and we're not micromanaging our staff. Both of those have a tendency to end badly, but we want to use our time wisely, and we want our staff to use their time wisely. Which brings me to this question: is this sort of situation wise, right? And we're going to be doing a quick little survey here in just a second, because I have a feeling that many of us on the call, we've probably seen computers like this one in the photo, right, that are held together with like duct tape and a prayer, or we've seen this in a nonprofit, right? Or we've seen the nonprofit where they're using only free software or only the super cheap software. or the nonprofit where everybody has to train themselves how to use the software. And so most of them will muddle along rather than ever mastering it. Or you might even have a dozen different systems that kind of don't talk to each other. Instead, when there are good systems on the market that are affordable and integrated. And there's also the nonprofit where you have the do-it-yourself tech support, right? Where if your computer breaks, you are the person, whether or not you've ever had to fix a computer before or not. And so the quick survey I want to do, I'd like to ask everybody to briefly turn off your video. Just turn off your video. Great. And we're basically going to be voting by video, right? We're going to flip on the video to vote yes. And so if you have ever seen one of those situations I mentioned in a nonprofit where it's the computers like the one in the picture, or where people have to train themselves, or the DIY tech support, flip your video back on. Let's see how many of us have that kind of rings true a little bit. Got 4, 5. Is that everybody? 7. Couple. Okay, let's do the no vote just for fun. So let's turn off our video again. And who's never seen that and thinks I'm crazy and they don't know what I'm talking about? Barbara has never. Oh, Barbara went back off. Okay, so you guys have seen this before. Good. So I'm doing a little bit of preaching to the choir, but let's talk about kind of how to solve this problem, because this is one again where we're sometimes blind to it, right? Or we think that that's part of what doing a nonprofit is that we're supposed to be scrappy. We're supposed to save every single penny we have. Well, so I've taken this problem on before, and the example I'm going to give you is going to illustrate why it's important to tackle this and why having a computer like the one in the picture is just really not acceptable. Once upon a time, I was helping out this great local nonprofit, smart, dedicated staff. They have a blue ribbon board, community respect, big impact. All their computers, everybody on staff had a laptop, which is great for going in and out of meetings and things like that. But all these laptops, they had come to the organization secondhand from a grant maker. So a grant maker had already said, this equipment isn't good enough for our staff anymore, right? And sure enough, this organization had already had them for like 2, 3, 4 years. And so a lot of them wouldn't hold a charge. They needed constant tech support. They were slow. They needed a lot of rebooting. And this also would create morale problems, because think about it. If that's the kind of equipment you're giving to staff, what is the message you're sending about how much you value their time? If they're constantly having to reboot their computer and waiting for things to load and things like that. And so it turns out that having those computers bundled together with duct tape ends up being very often penny wise and pound foolish. And so with this particular organization, I help them to connect the dots to understand the cost of the lost productivity that saving all those penny was costing them, right? And so my conservative estimates, based on just, staff, not even, not waiting hours, just conservative estimate of the time lost, was that on average, and actually like your average kind of entry-level employee, so $50,000 with benefits, on average, they were losing $1,500 worth of productivity on each employee. And that doesn't kind of match up very well when you think that brand new equipment would cost half of that. So it would pay for itself in 6 months. It's going to last for 2 to 5 years, and you're sending a different message to the staff. So that has a different kind of impact on morale. But lots of nonprofits, we fall into this trap, and we're told that we're expected to save money at every opportunity. And but that's the kind of saving of money that ends up not serving us well. And very often, I don't know the specific situations for your nonprofits, but I've seen this enough to be able to tell you that most nonprofits have one or more of these things going on. And sometimes you're so used to it. Sometimes you become so accustomed to that you really have to kind of get some perspective to see it. So 4th tip for today is automation. And that's because, it is the 21st century now. And over the past few years, a lot of great tools have come onto the market for small and medium nonprofits. Either they're specifically for those nonprofits, or they're tools that are easily adapted and useful in the nonprofit context. And we automate to free up our staff time so that we can make more progress on the things that are really core to the mission, right? And it's like doing the books, that isn't core to the mission. That's something we do to actually do the mission. And so we want to make all of those functions happen as quickly as possible so we can actually have more time to do the work that we're passionate about. And so just one example of this is expense reports. And I've run into a bunch of nonprofits who have unnecessary pain with this. And the kind of traditional model with expense reports is, you have staff over the course of the month who are, the fundraising staff are going out and having coffee or dinner with people, and the executive director is, purchasing this, that, and the other, which is all good and that's normal. But some of them have a hard time keeping track of their receipts. Some of them just toss them in a shoebox and forget about them. Some of them lose their receipts. And so at the end of the month, when the bookkeeping staff, the accounting staff need that information, there's a whole lot of wrangling. There's a whole lot of back and forth that's unpleasant for everybody. It eats up a lot of time. There's a lot of back and forth like, now what was this receipt for and who were you having lunch with? A lot of time gets wasted, and it creates a lot of frustration, even ill will within the organization. We don't want that. And so there are some great cloud-based systems these days that help and make that easy. And so last year, a local mid-sized nonprofit switched off of that old manual system, and they adopted a cloud-based system for those expense reports. And what do I mean by a cloud-based system for those expense reports? I mean one that lets all the staff, if they're out to lunch or whatever and they need to make a purchase on behalf of the organization, they can pull out their smartphone, take a picture, code it really quickly, right? Lunch with Bob to talk about blah, 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 and charge this to the blah, blah, blah budget. They hit send and it's done. Now they can lose the receipt. Now they can forget about it. All they have to do is spend 30 seconds at the end of that, when they have that transaction, and just get it over with. They're done. Some of these cloud-based systems actually come with company credit cards integrated, and so it all talks to each other really nicely. You can have it load up into QuickBooks or your accounting software, and some of them have even more kind of bells and whistles that'll improve your technology. And some of them are even free. You may have heard of like Expensify, which does some of this. Expensify charges. There are other ones out there that are actually free. In the case of this particular nonprofit, they were able to reduce pain for staff, even staff that hates technology, they told me. Even those staff people came around like a month or two later and said, oh my God, this is awesome. Thank you for doing this. And their rough estimate was that they were saving 8 to 16 hours per month across the organization because they made this switch. Are there things that you'd like to do if you had an extra full day or two every month? I bet there, and that's why we adopt this technology, right? So tip number 5 today is our pandemic pivot. And that's because the pandemic has helped us to see some things that might have been under our nose, but we kind of had to put them to the test. And so last year I got to work with this great nonprofit from New Jersey. And the pandemic, like it did for most organizations, it sent all of their staff to a work from home situation. And after they'd been in this for a while, they were much more receptive to talking about kind of long-term changes that they might not have been ready to talk to without the pandemic, because they'd gotten to test like, what is it like to work from home? And how is that impacting or not impacting our ability to serve the people we serve? And for some organizations, you have to be face-to-face with people, but some others, work from home, it can increasingly be a more viable kind of thing. And so with this particular organization, I help them work with those lessons that they learned and apply those to, what can we do to save money now that we're kind of seeing that work from home works? And so they saw that they'd been burning $30,000 a year for services that they were learning that they really didn't need. And so that was rent, and that was their photocopier lease. And so they were able to go back out and negotiate their rent with their landlord, negotiate the lease on their photocopier. And I don't know about you guys, but for me, I'd much rather find $30,000 a year in savings than to get a new $30,000 a year grant, because that $30,000 a year in savings, like that's going to keep on giving every single year, and I don't have to do anything to keep collecting it. But if it's a new grant, I have to do reports, I have to do tracking, I have to do ongoing cultivation and renewal with that. So the money that you can save, the money that's already in your pocket, is so much better if you can just keep it in your pocket. And this is, again, another one of those where, 12 months ago, maybe none of us would have guessed that rent and the photocopier lease could go away. But a lot of us are saying that, wow, yeah, maybe it is time, and maybe we're not getting the kind of value on those any more than we thought we were. Tip number 6 is dashboards, financial dashboards. And I'd always understood that there were a certain number of people in the population who just, they and numbers aren't friends. But I learned something new last year that blew me away. And that is I got specific numbers on how many of us have math anxiety. 93% of American adults have some level of math anxiety. 93%. That number blew me away. That means 13 out of 14 people have some level of discomfort with math, right? It's a spectrum, but that's a lot of people. If you have a board of 14 people, that might mean that only one person in there is really able to look at this and, if I, not break a sweat and like, yeah, cool. I got all the information I need, right? Most organizations, they have a lot of people in key leadership positions who are not really engaging with the numbers the way that they ideally should, right? And so the question I have for you is, are your financial reports engaging your board and engaging your critical staff management, right? Or is it possible those financial reports are creating anxiety? Is it possible those financial reports that people are just shutting up rather than admit that they might have some math anxiety or that they don't understand what that jumble of numbers on the screen is? And from my perspective, and what I've learned working with nonprofits for more than 20 years now is that the board's number one job, and the one that they can be legally held accountable for, is their fiduciary responsibility. And that's where this information has come to weigh more and more heavily on me, because really, can the board do their fiduciary responsibility if they're not engaged with the money? And so you guys see those numbers on the screen. Let me show you those same numbers. And this is what I'm talking about with dashboards, is just taking some critical pieces of financial information and turning into graphics that can help make it easier to understand and digest, right? This is the same data, but now for a lot of us, that makes it easier to visualize, right? Like, how important is the thrift store to our overall operations, and how important is government grants? And if the annual gala, if we're holding that outside and it gets rained out, what does that mean for our organization, right? Because that's what, 15% of our revenue. So here's another graph that I love doing, the cash projection. And this is a great way to help people dig in and kind of see, where did cash go last year? Where is it going this year? And to engage in that in a meaningful way that's much more accessible to so many more people. And a good financial dashboard, it doesn't replace all those numbers, right? You still want to get your standard balance sheet and your standard profit and loss report, but so it supplements that. And it's going to be 4 to 10 key graphics that just help everybody engage with those numbers, and especially the kind of key things that you want to be checking in on a regular basis. And it's those, kind of key measures of the organization's financial health. Here's another example, right? Program profitability. And this is one I've had to help a couple of organizations with, where we're, kind of trying to figure out what's going on here, and we might have to make some difficult decisions as an organization. And you always want your leaders to focus on what's most important, right? You don't want to have time going down rabbit holes, which can sometimes happen if people are looking at, those big, long printouts of a financial report and like, all right, well, tell me more about, they think they need to be asking about the pencil budget. And it's because they're not getting the information in a format that they can digest. So anyway, here's one, program profitability, right? And we can see, looking at this graph, I hope everybody can see pretty quickly that 3 of these programs are profitable, right? Cats, dogs, and the horse program, they're profitable. The fish program's losing about $50,000 a year. This kind of graphic can help everybody around the table go, as much as we love talking about the horses because they're beautiful, majestic animals, we really need to have a serious conversation about the fish program right now, right? And 20 years ago, it was the kind of thing where dashboards were kind of for big nonprofits because it's kind of cumbersome to build them and not a whole lot of people had the skills. And just these days, lots of small and medium-sized nonprofits are getting dashboards. Some of them are also engaged in fractional CFO services. So, you don't have to have, it's not a question of like, do we either have no help getting the financial analysis done, or it's a 40-hour-a-week position. A lot of them are finding that engaging for 10 or 20 hours a month with a fractional CFO helps them get the financial advice and the financial analysis that they need so they can make strategic financial decisions and really get the good analysis of their finances that they need. Last tip for today, if we didn't understand it before, I think for most of us last year helped make clear why it's important for us to think about justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion with our organizations. And it even took me a while. I used to believe the myth that work numbers are neutral, but numbers, the numbers themselves, they aren't animate things, and so they personally don't have biases. But the humans that are using the numbers, we can have, even if we don't have the explicit bias, we can have this unintentional stuff going on. And so stuff can happen in the back office that can either help us create a more just, equitable, diverse, and inclusive world, or can kind of hold it back. And in my experience, most nonprofits have opportunities to improve in this and for us to actually connect our good intentions with good actions that we didn't even know that we could take. So one example of this, and again, we're talking about expense reimbursement because it's a great concrete example. And in a lot of organizations, businesses or nonprofits, you have these situations where the employee will often pay for expenses on the employer's behalf out of their own pocket. And sometimes it's small stuff like coffee with a client, but there are things like mileage sometimes that they're having to get reimbursed for at the end of the month, or travel expenses, or even direct expenses for the organization. Sometimes it's things like airplane tickets and the cost of a hotel. And then they have to present an expense report and get reimbursed after the fact. Sometimes it takes a week to get reimbursed. Sometimes it takes even longer. And it took me a while to understand why this was important and that we can and we should know better. And especially because new technology makes doing this in an inclusive way so much easier than it used to be 10 or 20 years ago. So for comparison, with expense reimbursement, you basically have a situation where the employer is borrowing for the employee. And that's, when you sit back and look at it, like that's not exactly the kind of situation we want to set up, especially because there is a power imbalance between the employer and the employee. And so can the employee even say no? When that employee is able to use a company credit or debit card, the organization is paying its own bills directly. So it's not asking the employee for a de facto loan. With reimbursement, that tends to disproportionately disadvantage people from poor and historically marginalized communities, because they're the ones who might have less access even to having a personal credit card, or they might just have less financial wherewithal, less inherited wealth that they might be able to use as a cash cushion to carry them over from month to month to be able to carry their employer, right? With a credit or debit card, that's fair to everybody. It doesn't matter whether or not that employee comes from one background or another. They're able to make expense pay things on behalf of the employer without it coming out of their pocket. These reimbursement situations, they can sometimes create shame and embarrassment for the employee. If that's an employee who doesn't have the money to actually pay for the flight in advance and kind of hold that for a month, they might not even have a credit card because of debt problems or any number of things. That can be a really terrible situation. That's not the kind of thing that we want for our staff, right? Having a credit or debit card available to that staff person for the exclusive purpose of purchasing things on behalf of the employer, that empowers them, it shows trust. So reimbursement, it in effect discriminates and excludes people. Whereas having a credit or debit card for your staff people, that can welcome and engage them. And we don't even know very often who in the organization might have financial strain. Like most of us don't walk around with that on our sleeves. Another statistic I found out recently, 80% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. 80% of Americans. That blew me away. Like I knew some, and I know people in my own family, but 80% is a big number. And we also don't know like who's declared bankruptcy, who can't get a credit card. And do we really want to discriminate against those people? Do we want to discriminate the folks who don't have the financial wherewithal? And maybe my thought is we don't. And we don't want to exclude them from being able to even get ahead. Like are they having to turn down that promotion because they don't want to deal with the embarrassment of, I can't take that position my boss used to have because I don't have a credit card and I can't go to a conference and come back the next month and get $2,000 back, right? So the technology today makes it easy, right? There are great options out there. There are free cards. There are some that you can get an unlimited number of cards for free, virtual cards. So you can easily control the budgets on the back end. And so if you have somebody, you can, when that person doesn't need the card, you can shut it down. And then that person needs to go to a conference and say, all right, how much are you gonna need for the conference? You put that amount on the card and that's it, right? And once they're back, like you shut it down again. And so it's all very easy to control and manage. And so from my perspective, like we've reached a point where the technology just makes it so easy that why wouldn't we want to do that for our staff? So in summary, and we're just about to our Q&A period, you guys, hidden savings is something you can look for. Looking at your vendors is one opportunity for you to find hidden savings in your organizations. Thinking about the right tool for the job. Are you confident that the tools that you are using aren't Swiss Army knives that are getting used to make furniture, right? Might you have some opportunities there? Remembering that time is money, not that we're using a stopwatch, right? But might you have a computer and duct tape situation where even though you've been saving money on the front end, it's been killing your productivity. It's been hurting your productivity so much that it's actually more expensive than just going out and making that purchase of equipment. Automation is another opportunity for us, right? Whether it's expense reports or something else, is there an opportunity to eliminate pain in the organization? All that wrangling over where are your receipts or the wasted time? Have you learned anything from the pandemic that you can apply to your expenses, right? Can you renegotiate the rent or the copier lease or other things that maybe used to seem like they were important, but now maybe you've learned that your organization can use that money better? Not that you never need a photocopier, but maybe you don't need it often enough to actually have a leased copier or a big copier. Dashboards, right? So we can engage the other 93% of the people around us. And finally, justice, equity, diversity, inclusion. You guys, I should have said this earlier. I'm not an expert in this area, but I've picked up a few things along the way. And so this is just me sharing that, switching from a reimbursement situation to credit and debit cards can be a step in the right direction and to create a more welcoming workplace, especially for those folks it's been traditionally harder for them to make their way in our workplaces. So that's it. Ready for questions, comments, threats?
I have a question.
Okay.
So have you run into this issue before with the credit debit card? As an executive director in one of my positions, I tried to apply for a credit card for our organization. They wanted me to be personally liable on it. Have you run into that?
Sometimes that happens, yeah. It just depends on the kind of how long has the organization been around, what are the assets, that sort of thing. Those things can help. Sometimes it can help to shop it around, but yeah, some of them are gonna want a personal guarantee. And that just a lot of it depends on kind of the situation of the nonprofit. But so that I would certainly weigh that. But even in that situation, and depending on your position as the executive director or whoever's kind of having to sign off on that credit card, like you don't want to put that person in a situation, right? If you're a board member considering that piece of advice, well, do you want to put your executive director in a position where you're asking them to give a personal guarantee? So that's definitely a piece of it. But debit cards from your bank, if nothing else, right? If you can't get a credit card, you can get debit cards from your bank. And you can shuffle money around there too, or you can have prepaid cards and other things.
Or another organization I worked for, the board president, I think had the card, not only had the main card, but had the ability to get cards for certain staff. So I guess it varies by the bank you use, the history that the organization has at the bank, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and certainly kind of the maturity, the size and kind of age of the organization and their level of assets. And so once you get to a certain threshold, once you get to, $500,000 or $1 million, like that should be a purely kind of staff thing to figure out probably. board might give advice, but
Okay, let's see now. Oh, Roseanne has to leave. Okay. Now I've got a few things to go, but I want to make sure that anybody who wants to get in touch with Sean, here is his information on the screen. And I don't see questions typed, but does anybody else have a question?
Yeah,
Sean?
I have a question. Nancy?
Yeah, who is talking?
Nancy Walker?
Hi, Nancy Walker.
Yeah, hi. Well, listen, when you were talking about the dashboards, what about the fact that Excel has some ability to itself create some graphics and I don't know, pivot tables? I'm not that advanced with Excel, but could not that be used to create some graphics to show relationships, Sean?
absolutely, Nancy. You kind of stole my thunder on that a little bit, because that's what I used to make those graphs that you saw. Yeah, so good for you for kind of connecting those dots. Yeah, Excel's a great tool for that. And you can go a long ways, get a long ways down the road using Excel, and it's just a matter of kind of, I found the biggest barrier was just getting the darn thing built the first time.
Yeah.
And also letting go, for some of us, like I'm a recovering perfectionist. For some of us also, it's letting go of that and just asking everybody, like we're going to aim to put together a good dashboard. And can we all agree to, unless it's a flaming dumpster fire, can we agree that we're going to like live with it for 3 or 6 months before we start to meddle with it and imagine all the possibilities? And giving yourself permission like that as a recovering perfectionist, that and getting that permission from the other people in the room, if it's like a finance committee or something like that, that can really help everybody to appreciate and use the tool and get into it. And then of course, there is room for improvement, but just getting the first one out there is the toughest thing.
Other questions? And feel free to turn your mics on if you want to do it that way. It's more intimate.
Hi, this is Joshua Levy. Thank you,
Hi,
Sean, for
Josh.
hey Nancy, for presenting today. Just wanted more of a comment, share with you tip number 7, equity, justice, and inclusion regarding credit card and reimbursement. Or reimbursement versus a credit card. I thought that was a pretty unique perspective. So thank you for raising that and bringing that to awareness. I did have a staff member within the last couple of years who frequently would ask for that device or mechanism, such as a credit card. We had tossed around the idea of doing that. After thinking through it, we don't have too many expenses coming in for what we do, as far as people needing to go out and spend a few bucks for whatever might be needed. I wasn't really disagreeing with him, but of course there's trust. There's, still, even if he did something stupid, you could certainly see it, put a stop to it, so on and so forth. But it's a good perspective. And when I look back, I think he may have been coming from a possible perspective of himself being financially limited. So to go out and, spend 25 bucks here or there, maybe that was kind of a concern for him. He was happy to help, but if he was coming from a financial limitation, could have been a strain that I unintentionally was overlooking. So thanks for that perspective.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And it's one that I had to learn too. And I had to, my boss kind of pulled me aside because I was being kind of hard-nosed about that kind of thing. And she kind of just laid it out. And when she laid it out, I was like, well, crap. but now I can do better, right? And since then, like, even better tools have come online. And I especially do love these kind of credit cards that kind of can function like debit cards and things like that. So and the functionality on them is pretty darn good. And that was another barrier for me, like working in a back office, it always feel like, good Lord, I already have, a to-do list that's way too long and too many things going on. But this one, it's not, you get connected with the right vendor and the right tool, and it doesn't necessarily need to be a heavy lift for the back office. It can be a light lift. And so once kind of understood that and how that can alleviate pain and create, granted, this should be something that we should just take for granted, that we all like are trying to treat our coworkers the best possible way, but it can, help to break down that barrier, that silo that can sometimes exist between the back office and the rest of the organization when they see that you've done it. And of the things that we can do for those of us who are in the back office, this is, I think, one of the easier ones.
I'm grateful
Thanks.
that you brought that up as well. And Joshua raises an interesting issue too about our own bias that we're not always aware of. March in us nonprofit meetup is all about diversity, inclusion, and equity. And our meetup will be on that too. And it will be all about how to be better in our nonprofits with those issues. But one of the things I'm finding as I'm doing research is I have to go back to when I used to teach people to be mediators back in Rapid City, South Dakota. We did a whole section on bias and being able to recognize our own bias. And I think it's critical that we be able to do that. And unless somebody like Sean brings it up, we don't even know that we're doing that. So I too am grateful for that. Any other
Well,
questions?
that's also an example that Sean gave. It's not so much even the bias of an individual person as something that's sort of built into the system, the way we think of doing things. It's kind of in the business system. Listen, Sean, I wanted to ask you, how come your website and your email don't end in .com?
Well, thank you for asking that. The first, the .com was already taken. It was taken a long time ago. I wish I'd thought about that, 20 years ago or 30 years ago. It was already taken. .org was available, and there was a time a long time ago where you had to be a nonprofit to get the .orgs, but that's not the case. Hasn't been the case for a long time, and so since I'm serving nonprofits exclusively, I thought that'd be a good one to go with.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, that's nice. Let's see. Let me do a couple more things. I know we're going to end early today, which everybody always likes. Our meetups go from 12:15 to 1:45 generally. And I just have a few more things I definitely want to share with you. So let's see if I can make that happen.
I've got a question for Sean while you're doing that.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, this is Jan Hans. So Sean, tell us, what kind of consulting do you do? Do you also kind of lead board retreats to help strengthen boards?
It's been a long time since I've facilitated a board retreat. And so if you're looking for that particular skill set, I want to send you to Philanthroforce, which is my new, it's kind of a side gig that I have going on. I can send you I have Jan's email address, but I can drop that into the chat. It's not going to publicly launch until the end of February, but Philanthroforce, it's a new tool that's basically to help nonprofits find great consultants. And so we're going to be, in the next couple of days, there are going to be a whole bunch of new listings appearing there. And you'll be able to, that'll make it easy for you to find somebody who does like a retreat facilitation. Oh, I'm sorry. Forget what I said. Nancy, don't go to Philanthroforce, go to Nancy.
Yeah, yes, board development, board retreats, that's what I do. So,
okay.
But to answer your question, Jen, the rest of your question, Jen, I basically specialize in everything back office. And so if it's not programs, if it's not pure programs, if it's not pure fundraising, either I'd love to help you or I'd love to help to connect you to the person who can. And so that's, it's things like, certainly bookkeeping and financial reports, financial analysis, that's a piece of it, but, basic HR, basic IT, and pretty much, I just take a lot of pleasure and pride in helping nonprofits get that part of the organization running smoothly. And so if you have anything going on that's in that area of the organization, I'd love to lend a hand.
Okay, great. Thank you. I know you've helped me with ideas already. Thanks.
You're welcome.
All right. first want to say that if anybody has any issues they're struggling with, have any questions about their nonprofit, please go onto my website under Contact Us and book a free strategy call, 30 minutes at least, although I always go longer, it seems, because I love talking to my nonprofit leaders. And I want to tell you about a new feature that's coming up. I'm going to be holding some power workshops. And when I first thought about this, I wasn't sure if I would do it in March or April. March is our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Month, so I'll be doing this in April, not as a meetup, but as a workshop. And I'm going to limit it to 10 people. The cost will be $147 per person. It will be online, but there will be practice for the people who attend. You will be practicing how to make asks, but you will have homework beforehand. So please keep your eyes open for that. I also invite you to attend my mini meetup online for a monthly giving program. If you go to poweryourmission.com and look at the navigation bar under online courses, you can read the entire description for the monthly giving program there. But do not enroll from there, because if you enroll from there, it's $87. And I always give a $20 discount to anyone who has been to one of my meetups. And if you read the description and want to attend this online monthly giving masterclass, just email me. There's my email address, and I'll give you the $20 discount link. Then there's my primary course. My primary course begins with how to redefine the relationship between your leadership team and your board, how to build that relationship so that you become a team that learns it's an 8-week campaign for major gifts. That course is $597, and I will tell you that when I do my workshop in April, a lot of what's in this course will be in that 147 workshop. Now in February, this is what we have going on. The entire month of February will be on resource development. So in our Facebook group, we'll be doing these live interviews. Thank you to Shannon for introducing me to Christine Herlin. If I live here, I give here. She'll be our guest on 2/9. 2/16 will be Harriet from the Texas Grants Resource Center. 2/25 is Cynthia, who is today doing her second big virtual fundraiser. She'll be talking about virtual fundraisers on that day. I will also probably be doing some live videos myself relating to resource development. So again, those are within the Facebook group. The meetup, I will be doing the meetup myself. It's called The 3 Things You Need to Be a Fundraising Rock Star. I might change the name of that. We don't know. All right. Any questions before I thank our wonderful people today? And I know we're much shorter than usual, but I know you appreciate that because you're all very busy.
So, Nancy,
Yes.
in order to attend a Facebook session, does someone have to have a Facebook account?
Well, you have to join the group. So I'm guessing you have to have some kind of account, a personal or a business page.
Thank you.
If you have a business, Nancy, that was you that asked that question, right?
Yes, yes,
Does your organization have a Facebook page?
yes.
Okay, you can join as a page.
Oh,
Yeah, you can. The Austin Nonprofit Meetup Facebook group can be joined by pages. I think I picked that on the setting.
so if I had someone on the board that didn't have a Facebook account, I would just give them the login information and they could pretend that they're the moderator for our Facebook page.
Well, that's a good question. I don't know. I mean, you might have to be an administrator of that Facebook page. I am not sure. That's a good question, Nancy.
Thanks.
Okay, anybody else?
Do you ever make recordings of these things available afterwards, either the Facebook things or even the session we had today?
Yes. Okay, every meetup is recorded. And after, what happens when we're done here, when we close down, Zoom sends me a link. It's not immediate. It's like, I don't know, an hour later, let's say. They send me a link, and then I send it out to everybody who has attended. So you will get the link always for any of these meetups. Now, in terms of the live interviews in the Facebook group, those are always available within the Facebook group, but you still have to get in there into the Facebook group. So you'd have to either add a board member to as administrator of your Facebook page, so if they didn't have the personal account. Otherwise, they could just come as a personal person.
Thanks, Nancy.
You bet. It's really good to see all you guys from your organization, all of you guys. I miss seeing everybody in person, that's for sure. And as usual, I want to thank my favorite Shannon person for doing this every month. Thank you, Shannon. And I think she put a link. You did, right, Shannon?
For Leap to Success? Oh, you bet.
Yeah. Yes. And I have something to tell you. Years ago, when I was executive director at Travis Audubon, this is how I met Shannon. I needed a volunteer, a professional level volunteer, to come in and create a grant administration program of some kind. Because in those databases, it's great. They're great for donors. They're great for memberships, but I don't know of any that are really great with what you specifically need for grant administration. So I got hold of Shannon, and she sent me, I call this woman my Excel queen. She made this program in Excel that had a lot of automatic features. I didn't even know Excel did this. And I won't go into all that. Her name is Kathy Tran. And the reason I bring her up is because Kathy is going to do a short piece for me in the February meetup on resource development. Okay. So I thought, yeah. So see, I've stayed in touch with that woman through Shannon for, oh my God, how many years ago? It's been 8 years ago or 9 years ago that I first met Shannon. Yeah, boy, time flies. So listen, if you have a need of any kind like that at your nonprofit, or you need I think you also have helped me with graphic design people or something like that, right? And also I worked when I was the interim executive director at the Palace Theater in Georgetown. I couldn't understand how to use eTapestry. Ugh, what a horrible program. I hated it. Anyway, Shannon sent me somebody to help me with that. So that kind of, that level of professionalism, that's what you can get through Shannon's organization.
Kathy, sorry, Nancy.
Yeah.
I'm used to being in Launchpad Job Club meeting every Friday morning. Ivy has a question for Sean. So Ivy, if you want to unmute yourself to ask your question, you're more than welcome to do so.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. This is a little bit getting into specifics, but I just in the interest of streamlining our time with back-end operations, one of the things that comes up a lot in my mind when I'm trying to get expenses together at the end of the month, code our receipts, I'm trying to think about multiple things when coming up with the correct codes. So I'm thinking about, how we wrote our budget, how we divided up each expense in the budget by class, and trying to think at the end of the year, how is this all going to look on something like Charity Navigator or one of these sites that shows you the breakdown of what percentage a nonprofit showed, or what percentage a nonprofit spent on programs versus fundraising versus administrative costs. I'm wondering how, and maybe even open this up to other EDs, how important does that final end of the year breakdown really, do people really look at that number? How important is it to be thinking about that when we're coding our individual receipts, even for, the little small things like lunch for a donor, or, paper at the office supply store? And how can we streamline the time that it takes to code receipts in order to not make that feel like a thing that has lots of compounding consequences?
I kind of hear a two-part question in there. One of them is kind of making the process of kind of coding and kind of just getting stuff into the bookkeeping less painful. And the other one is how important is that, like on the 990 and what's going to appear on GuideStar and Charity Navigator and that sort of thing. Is that a fair summation? With kind of GuideStar and Charity Navigator, I'd say that's not fully my area of expertise. Or some people who, and maybe somebody on the call has more expertise with that than I do. My experience and sense of them is that it really depends. And some donors are going to make a big deal out of that and others are not. And the more that you have a relationship with current and prospective donors, the less important it is for you to be hitting those particular things. And the whole, are you familiar with the overhead myth?
I don't think so. Maybe.
Okay. So I would encourage you to, and anybody else who's not familiar with it, this is a really important concept for nonprofits, the overhead myth. And 20 minutes reading and you'll have all the basics. But the really short version of the overhead myth is this idea that you can judge a nonprofit's worth and impact by how little they spend on administration. And it's a very common belief, and it's a very destructive belief, because you end up in those situations like the ones that we were talking about earlier today with the computers held together with duct tape. And you have nonprofits doing that instead of actually investing in the computers that they need to go out there and really move the needle. And so if you Google overhead myth, you'll find some good writings on that. And then there's a guy called Dan Pallotta who has an awesome 15-minute TED Talk that's a awesome takedown on that. And so if you just want to have like a feel-good affirmation in that area, like it's a great one to have, because he really kind of dissects it all really succinctly and really powerfully. But again, at the end of the day, my experience is it depends on your relationships with your donors. It's rare that you're going to have like just a donor from out of the blue that you don't know about, like, I'm thinking about donating to you, but let me go first and before I even have a conversation with you, let me go and check out Charity Navigator. Oh my, you're spending 21% on admin. I can't talk to you. That's just not how it usually works in my experience. With the reducing pain on the kind of getting stuff in the system, some of it does depend on kind of where the expenses are happening and this, that, and the other, but there's some good tools out there that can help you. So you and this is a longer conversation, but like there's one that I like called Divvy. They gives you the ability to kind of, when you're having the expense, get in your phone, take the picture, code it right then that this is for the Ducks program and it's pencils for the Ducks program, whatever, and bang, it's uploaded. It can load up into QuickBooks automatically. And so you're not even dealing with paper anymore. There are some other great, and if you're interested in Divvy at all, talk to me later because I can connect you to a great person at that organization, great salesperson basically, who can give you a great low pressure kind of pitch and also incentivize you to make it worth your while to listen to their 30-minute pitch. But it's a low pressure sale thing and it's a great product. I use it and lots of other nonprofits are using it now. But then there are other things like if you have a lot of expenses you're paying every month, things like bill.com can be really helpful. So you get, it basically automates a lot of that as well. And so you get your people, your vendors, instead of mailing you a bill, you get them to email it to bills@mynonprofit.org. And bill.com then gets that email, it reads it for you. If it keeps on seeing that same bill, if it's a recurring bill, then it's going to go ahead and code it for you automatically. And it's going to say, oh, Ivy needs to, these bills are the ones that Ivy needs to always approve, or that our board treasurer needs to approve, or whoever. And so if you have, in bill.com, I think it's like $50 a month. So, if it's 20 bills, it's probably not worth it. But if it's a whole lot more than that, it's a really cool tool to take a lot of the pain out of that. Or you can pay somebody to do your bookkeeping for you too. But you'll still might have some conversations about, well, you gave me a receipt and it doesn't tell me what it's for. So you still have to do a little bit of coding no matter what.
Can I address that as well? Ivy, are you talking about I just had a painful, anxious moment of a memory I had as an executive director when, you know how in your, I assume you have an accountant and you're getting the bookkeeping every month. Are you doing that? Yes. So you know how you have those little, you called them classes. I think, what did we call them? Were they classes? Classification. But it's the line item. You know, it's where do you put this for the accountant so the accountant gets it in the right place? And why is that even important? I'm trying to remember, one of the things that happened back in those days for me is the bookkeeper and I weren't on the same page, and I didn't realize that they were putting stuff somewhere that I wasn't recognizing. So it was skewing my budget to actual. That's what was happening for me. It was messing me up. And so, and it's also when I learned that thing about taking everybody's salary and dividing it up between programs. Do you do all that, you know, for that section of the 990? So I think some of it is just related to learning how do you know where that expense goes? Is that some of it?
I think we feel fairly confident in being able to identify how an expense relates to kind of where it was intended to fall in the budget. Since we're a small team, most of us are a part of writing the budget. So by the time it comes to spending the money, we're familiar with where the planning for that expense came from. But yeah, I think that it's just nerve-wracking to me sometimes to worry about how is this going to look in the end of the year report? How is it going to look for our, you know, breakdown of expenses? Do I need to be tracking month to month how much of a percentage we're spending in programs versus admin versus?
Yeah, that's why, because when you do your annual report, and some funders still look at that breakdown between infrastructure or administration or general expenses and fundraising and programs, just like on your 990, right? And so just like Sean said, it's that overhead myth of well, if you've got 50% in administration, that doesn't look so good. Some people used to say funders want to see 75% all related to programs, you know. Mike, what's his name? The officer, the trustee at Meadows Foundation says he doesn't look at that anymore, which is great. Those people have come a long way. But yeah, there's still going to be, your funders want to look at the little circle, like Sean was showing that dashboard. They want to see that circle look at least more balanced between what I would call the infrastructure expenses, the fundraising expenses, and programs. And so that's why all the salaries get divided up percentage wise. That's what I used to give to my bookkeepers. The salaries, any of the office supplies that I could relate to programs, everything, trying to break it up so it looks like you've got fundraising where it goes, programs where it goes, and administration where it goes. And I do think it's kind of important to be able to do that, because people still do look at that overhead myth that way. Just an opinion.
The other thing I'd add, Ivy, I wonder if your chart of accounts is set up in a way that's helpful to you. Just, you know, there's something in the way that you're asking that question, and that makes me wonder, so it might be that your chart of accounts is set up in a way that kind of makes it difficult to do what should be really easy to do. And the chart of accounts is just a fancy word for how the bookkeeping is organized. The other possibility that I'm hearing what you're saying is it's possible that, you know, like if you're worried about, well, gosh, you know, we spent $1,000 on rent this month, but, you know, some of it's for programs and some of it's for admin and some of it's for fundraising, and like trying to figure out on a monthly basis what that was and split that up, like, yeah, that could be crazy making, and you don't have to do that to yourself. And there are a number of ways to handle that, but none of which really need to make you or anybody else lose any sleep. And it's a matter of kind of just figuring out some formulas and we're going to handle it this way, because you don't have to get that perfect. You're not going to get audited on, well, it says here in March that you used 80% of your facility for programs, but like you can get in the ballpark and it can be good, especially for a small to mid-sized nonprofit, and especially if grants aren't tied to that, then a good faith estimate can go a long way. And then it really depends on, do you want to make that adjustment annually, or do you want to make it monthly? Do you want to make it quarterly? And there are ways you can go about building those formulas to kind of make a good faith estimate. So if you do get audited and have somebody say, well, help me understand why you're saying that, only that 80% of your facilities expenses programs, there's a way to build that documentation. So it's, it should pass the smell test.
Okay, that's good to know. I guess I wonder sometimes if like you say, the smell test, like what I know to be true, that all these things, ultimately are needed in order to build successful programs, even if they're not direct program costs, they're all part of the puzzle. Having the best processes and procedures to show that in the numbers, I think is
maybe just having some guidelines like this lunch, do I count it as programs? Do I count it as admin, or that kind of thing? Also kind of knowing, is it fish or is it fowl?
Yeah.
And that's something you would do, Sean, right? You could help her.
I've been known to think that stuff through. I've been known to put a lot of thought into that. So yeah, it's not rocket science. It does take a little bit of time to sit down and kind of think it all through and kind of pick it apart, but it's the kind of thing that kind of once you've done it, you can have a template that's going to serve you for a long time.
Thank
and
you.
Half the battle is just documenting your decisions. Half of it's just having good documentation. Yeah.
So true, because that good faith thing is exactly the standard for board members too. So, excellent. What was I going to say about that? So I wish I would have had a Sean Hale when I was executive director before, because although I only changed those percentages once a year, I still remember being so frustrated about figuring that all out. And there was no Sean Hale out there to help me. So I've used Sean now.
You're very kind, Nancy.
All right. I see that Shannon had to leave. So I just want to thank Sean and thank our participants, and of course invite everybody to join us in the Facebook group and join us next, it'll be February 18th, and I'll send something out so you'll get that. So I think we're pretty much finished unless anybody has any other questions. And I appreciate everybody taking their time today. All right. Thank you, Ivy.
Thank you, Sean and Nancy.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you,
It's
Nancy.
fun.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great
Bye.
session. Bye.